Ababa, the Ethiopian capital where it's been announced that the man who's run Ethiopia for more than 2 decades, MELES ZENAWI, has died at the age of 57. There have been persistent reports that he was in poor health. Already, Kenya's Prime Minister, Raila Odinga, has said he fears for the security of Ethiopia, while Islamist insurgents in Somalia have claimed the country will now crumble. Mike Aldridge reports.
The rebels began pushing in through the suburbs at 1991. MELES ZENAWI's rebels from the northern region of Tigray and their allies sweep into Addis Ababa. It's the end for the Marxist military dictatorship of Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam, propped up by the Eastern Bloc and one of the many proxy theatres of the Cold War.
Will it ensure law and order?
MELES ZENAWI, from Marxist roots himself, was a medical student before he took up arms against the Mengistu regime. The legacy of the civil war and of the highly ideologically driven politics and of the decades of feudalism that preceded it was widespread and deep poverty and little investment in infrastructure. It made Ethiopia particularly vulnerable to famine, at its most devastating in 1984, when Highlanders trekked across the front lines of conflict in their thousands to seek help, and up to 1 million people died. MELES ZENAWI set this never-colonized land with various ethnic identities on a distinctive path of development, encouraging a structure of so-called ethnic federalism, but regularly accused by human rights groups of abuse against ethnic minorities. There have been clear limits to the tolerance of political dissent. When the result of elections was disputed in 2005, nearly 200 people died in the government's crackdown on opposition demonstrations. In the next elections, in 2010, MELES ZENAWI won 99% of the vote and began a third decade in power.
The parties who have been denied votes need to recognize the decision of this proud nation and its people. I advise them not to attempt to override this vote because I will not bow to pressure from foreign forces.
Under MELES ZENAWI, Ethiopia has seen a rapid rise in economic growth and attracted increasing foreign investment. China has been a big player. And while Western nations have had their worries about democracy and the handling of dissent, they also saw MELES ZENAWI as an ally not only in the potential economic transformation of his own country, but of the developing world in general.
Through democracy.
But will his legacy be greater or less stability? Mike Aldridge, BBC News.
And that is a very big question. Now, I was mentioning that MELES ZENAWI's death has prompted fears about the stability of Ethiopia and indeed the wider region. The president of Liberia, though, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, says Ethiopia is well placed to make a smooth and stable political transition.
I don't have fears because I believe there are many other leaders in Ethiopia who will get the support of regional leaders to make the transformation that is necessary, moving toward an open society. Perhaps those are one of the things that the former Prime Minister was not able to do, but his choice was to focus on economic development and the delivery of basic services to his people. And so the responsibility now to complete the political transformation will fall to his successor and the leaders and people of Ethiopia. And we all hope that they will rise to that challenge.
See if it's possible. Let's go live to Khartoum in Sudan now, because we can speak to the BBC's James Copnall. James, for many people, MELES ZENAWI, I suppose, was Ethiopia's government in many ways. We have those who fear for the worst, we have those who look for brighter things ahead. Who has most claim to be right, do you think?
Well, it's a very difficult question to answer at this point, simply because it's not 100% clear who's going to take over. I think it's fairly obvious that his Deputy Prime Minister, Haile Mariam, is in power for the moment, but it's clear also that constitutionally, the Parliament should have its say on who the actual successor is, and there'll be a number of contenders elbowing each other out of the way, as it were, as we speak, I would imagine. So the future destiny of Ethiopia, I suppose, depends an awful lot on who is to take over full-time from Meles Zenawi, and in a sense, if Meles himself was able to put into place a system that was able to succeed him now that he has passed away.
Right. I mean, the word repressive has cropped up more and more, hasn't it, in the last few years, and certainly post-election violence hasn't helped. Was he past his best?
I think it's very difficult to find many examples around the world of any leader who does particularly well into a third decade in power. So yes, there's probably an element of that. I suppose opposition leaders would say that actually the rot set in much earlier on. I think it's a mixed legacy in a way. There's certainly been a lot of economic development. He was praised around the world for some of his developmental vision and really clear thinking on some of the issues that affected his country. But it became increasingly difficult, I think, for Ethiopian opposition politicians and journalists, human rights activists to operate at all in the country. And I think that there is a sense that that got more and more severe as the years went on, yes.
Right, and is there any reason, James, to believe that Ethiopia's position regarding Somalia might change now? Clearly, Al-Shabaab have been very quick to jump up and down with some glee at Zenawi's demise.
Yes, they have, and of course Ethiopian troops have gone in on a couple of occasions to Somalia to combat Al-Shabaab, so one could see why they might do that. Again, I suppose it depends a little bit on who is the long-term successor to Meles Zenawi, and of course that individual could make a very difficult and different decision to some of the ones that Meles made. So certainly this is a point really in which all is possible, and I suspect the nature of the transition and who comes in next will be key for finding out Ethiopia's position, not just on Somalia, but also the negotiations between Sudan and South Sudan, which Meles Zenawi was personally very actively part of, and around the region people will be watching events very closely indeed.
Indeed. James, thank you very much. James Cockrell, who's in Khartoum at the moment. Well, let's have a look now at some of the other stories making headlines.